You know the room is empty. You check the door. You check the window. Nothing is moving. Then the lights go out, and suddenly the same room feels different. A hanging coat becomes a person. A small sound in the hallway becomes footsteps. The dark corner beside the bed seems deeper than it did 5 seconds ago. You know better, your body does not care. So why are humans so terrified of the dark? The first answer seems obvious. You are afraid because you cannot see. That is true, but incomplete. Darkness does something more important than hiding objects. It removes information. And for most of human and primate history, missing information at night could be deadly. Imagine your ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago. The sun has dropped below the horizon. The last red light is disappearing from the grassland. Your group has eaten. Children are close to adults. A small fire may be burning if your people know how to maintain one. Beyond that light is blackness. You hear grass move. Was it wind? A hyena? A leopard? Nothing appears. That uncertainty is the first key to understanding fear of darkness. Your brain does not need proof that a predator is nearby. In a dangerous environment, waiting for proof can be the worst strategy possible. If you hear a branch snap in daylight, you can look. At night, the same sound gives you fewer clues. Your visual system still works. Rod cells in your eyes are extremely sensitive to low light, but darkness strips away color and fine detail, and vision becomes less precise. The world does not disappear. It becomes ambiguous. And ambiguity changes the mathematics of survival. Suppose one ancestor hears movement in the darkness and assumes it is nothing. Most nights, that ancestor may be correct. But one wrong night can be enough. Now suppose another ancestor reacts too strongly. That ancestor freezes, moves closer to the group, wakes someone, or avoids walking alone. Most of those reactions may be unnecessary. But unnecessary fear is usually cheaper than being eaten. This does not mean evolution programmed a simple command into your brain that says darkness equals predator. Human fear is more complicated than that. But natural selection can favor nervous systems that respond quickly to situations where danger is possible and information is poor. Researchers Arne Oman and Susan Minecka described an evolved fear system that is especially prepared to deal with threats that repeatedly mattered during mammalian and primate evolution. Their work focused heavily on things such as snakes and other fear-relevant dangers rather than darkness itself. The important principle is broader. Fear does not always wait for slow, conscious reasoning. Your threat systems can react before you have fully identified what you are reacting to. That is exactly what darkness encourages. You hear first, you imagine second, you identify the cause later, sometimes much later. There is also a difference between fear and anxiety that matters here. Fear usually points at something. A snake, a charging animal, a face appearing where it should not be. Darkness often creates anxiety instead. You do not know what the threat is. You only know that you cannot rule one out. That distinction helps explain why the dark can feel oppressive even when nothing happens. A visible predator can be tracked. A hidden possible predator keeps the nervous system waiting. Waiting is exhausting. The body stays ready because the threat has no clear beginning and no clear end. That is why darkness is such a powerful context for imagination. Your brain is forced to predict before it can confirm. And prediction under uncertainty is exactly where old defensive biases become useful. And there is evidence that darkness itself changes human defensive responses. In 1997, Christian Grillon and colleagues placed healthy adults in alternating periods of light and complete darkness while measuring the acoustic startle reflex. The startle reflex is the rapid involuntary response your body makes to a sudden intense sound. In darkness, the participants startled more strongly. The researchers found no evidence that this was simply because people were paying more attention to sound. They argued that darkness was changing the emotional state of the participants. In other words, turn off the light and the nervous system becomes more defensive. That experiment happened in a laboratory. No lions, no snakes, no footsteps outside a cave. Yet darkness alone changed the response. Why? To see why that reaction might have been useful, move from the laboratory to Tanzania. Craig Packer, Alexander Swanson, Dennis Ikanda, and Hadas Kushnir analyzed an enormous record of African lion behavior and attacks on humans. Their 2011 study examined more than 1,000 lion attacks in southern Tanzania between 1988 and 2009, along with the effects of moonlight on lion hunting. The result is almost too perfect for the question. Lions were more dangerous to humans when nights were darker. Moonlight mattered because lions are ambush predators. When visibility drops, the predator gains something the human loses. Information. Your ancestors did not need to understand lunar ecology. They only needed to survive it. Picture the same ancestral camp again. The fire is small. A child is asleep. Someone hears movement beyond the light. No body can identify the source. That is the moment when fear becomes useful, not because darkness itself can bite you. Because darkness allows things that can bite you to approach without being identified early enough. The moon adds another clue. For modern people, moonlight often feels decorative. For anyone moving through a landscape without artificial lighting, it changes what can be seen. A bright night and a black night are not the same environment. Packer and colleagues found that the timing of attacks on humans shifted with the lunar cycle because lion hunting success and human evening activity interacted with moonlight. The important lesson is not that your ancestors consciously feared a particular phase of the moon. It is that natural darkness varied, and risk varied with it. The night itself had structure. Cloud cover, moonrise, vegetation, firelight, and open ground could all change how early a threat became visible. A nervous system sensitive to darkness was therefore responding to a real ecological variable, not a supernatural one. This is the first real answer. Humans are afraid of darkness because darkness historically increased uncertainty at exactly the time many dangerous animals became harder to detect. But there is a second layer. Predators are not the only threat. At night, terrain becomes dangerous too. A hole is harder to see. A cliff edge becomes less obvious. A thorn, branch snake, rival group, or unfamiliar path becomes harder to evaluate. Even ordinary movement becomes more expensive because every step contains less information. So darkness creates a general problem. You know less, while the consequences of being wrong can remain high. That is why your brain starts filling gaps. This is also why a pile of clothes can become a human shape at night. Your visual system receives incomplete input. Your brain still has to decide what it might be. When evidence is uncertain, a threat-biased guess can be safer than a relaxed one. If you mistake a coat for a person, you lose a few seconds of sleep. If an ancestor mistakes a predator for a harmless shadow, the cost can be much larger. But here comes the reversal. Your fear of darkness is not simply an ancient predator alarm frozen unchanged inside your brain. If it were, everyone would fear darkness equally. They do not. Experience matters. Culture matters. Childhood matters. Stress matters. Learning matters. Grillin's work itself helps show this. The stronger startle response in darkness was related to participants' reported fear of the dark during childhood. Later experiments also found darkness could increase startle in adolescence and in virtual dark environments. This suggests that the dark can act as an aversive context, but your personal history changes how strongly you respond. So you inherit a nervous system prepared to become cautious under uncertainty. Then life teaches that system what darkness means. A child who hears frightening stories may imagine monsters. A soldier may associate darkness with ambush. Someone raised in a quiet, safe environment may feel only mild discomfort. Another person may enjoy darkness. Evolution does not write the exact picture in your imagination. It helps shape the sensitivity of the system that creates the picture. Group living changes the calculation too. One person alone in darkness has limited information. Several people can listen in different directions. Someone can remain awake while others rest. A warning can spread before every individual sees the threat. Even without formal night watches, sleeping near other people changes vulnerability. This may help explain why darkness feels especially uncomfortable when you are isolated. Again, that does not mean your brain contains a specific prehistoric program saying never sleep alone. The point is simpler. For a social primate, safety has often depended on other eyes, other ears, and other bodies being nearby. Darkness reduces what one individual can know. A group can partly replace that lost information. Now another question appears. If darkness was so dangerous, how did humans ever sleep? The answer is that your ancestors did not face the night alone. Human survival increasingly depended on groups, shelters, vigilance, and eventually controlled fire. Fire matters here for an obvious reason. It pushes back darkness. But it also does something psychologically important. It creates a visible boundary. Inside the light, you can see faces, food, tools, children, and movement. Outside it, uncertainty begins. Archaeology cannot tell you the exact night when an ancestor first felt safer beside a flame. But Francesco Berna and colleagues found strong microstratigraphic evidence of burning inside Wonderwork Cave in South Africa around 1 million years ago. They found burned bone and ashed plant remains deep inside the cave. The evidence supports a very early association between hominins and fire in an archaeological context. It does not prove that those fires were specifically maintained to repel predators. That would go beyond the evidence. But fire eventually became one of the most powerful ways humans altered the night. Light extends vision. Heat changes where you can rest. Smoke and flame can influence animal behavior. A group gathered around fire can remain socially active after sunset. Night becomes less completely controlled by whatever is hiding beyond sight, and yet the fear remains. That may sound like an evolutionary failure. It is not. Evolution does not automatically erase a defensive reaction just because technology reduces the original danger. For most of the time your species and its ancestors existed, electric light did not exist. A switch that turns midnight into artificial day is extremely recent. Your nervous system is older than the bulb above your head. That explains one of the strangest modern experiences. You can be frightened in a dark bedroom while knowing there is almost certainly nothing there. Your conscious brain has modern information. The door is locked. The apartment is on the 10th floor. There are no lions in the hallway. But darkness still removes visual certainty, and the older defensive systems do not ask whether your insurance policy includes leopard attacks. They respond to missing information. This is why a tiny sound feels larger at night. The refrigerator clicks. A pipe expands. A branch touches a window. Your brain immediately searches for an agent. What made that sound? Is something moving? Is it getting closer? During daylight, visual evidence can answer those questions quickly. In darkness, the question survives longer, and fear grows in that gap. There is another reason darkness feels different. Humans are a strongly visual species. A huge amount of information about other people, animals, terrain, and objects comes through vision. When light disappears, you do not simply lose one sense among many. You lose one of your richest channels for checking whether a suspected threat is real. Your hearing becomes more important. Your touch becomes more important. But neither can instantly reconstruct an entire dark room. That is why turning on a light can destroy fear so quickly. The threatening object did not change. Information changed. The monster becomes a chair. The intruder becomes a coat. The moving creature becomes a curtain. Fear collapses because uncertainty collapses. So what were your ancestors really afraid of? Probably not darkness as an object. Darkness has no teeth. They were responding to what darkness did to the balance between predator and prey, safe path and dangerous path, familiar sound and unknown sound. Darkness made the world harder to predict. And in survival terms, unpredictability is dangerous. That also explains why fear of darkness can survive even when predators disappear. The brain does not need a lion-shaped stimulus. It only needs an uncertain environment where a threat could exist. This is the deeper answer. Humans are not terrified of darkness because your ancestors were irrational. They were cautious because darkness turned ordinary environments into information-poor environments. Predators benefited from that. Accidents became harder to avoid. Unknown sounds became harder to explain. The cost of a false alarm was usually small. The cost of ignoring a real threat could be enormous. Over evolutionary time, that asymmetry favored defensive caution. Then human development, experience, stories, trauma, and culture shaped the exact fears built on top of it. So when you lie in a modern bedroom and stare into a black doorway, two versions of reality exist at once. The modern one says, you are safe. The older logic says, you cannot fully verify that. That second system is not stupid. It is using a rule that worked for an extraordinarily long time. When information disappears, become more careful. Your ancestors answered darkness with groups, shelter, watchfulness, and eventually fire. You answer it with a light switch, but the sensation before the light comes on is much older. You began in a room you knew was empty. Then the lights went out, and the room changed. Now you know what actually changed, not the room. The amount of certainty your brain had about what might be inside it.